We can choose either nuclear weapons or NATO to defend ourselves against Putin, who will soon be facing us, rather than the other way around. Although he's currently defending against NATO, we're preparing for our victories and discussing his failures, as well as the internal conflicts within his regime. Sergei Jirnov, former KGB officer. Hello, Sergei and Irina. It's great to see you both. Greetings to our viewers. Telegram channels are buzzing about a build report suggesting that Ukraine will need a few weeks to rebuild its nuclear weapon stockpile, although build statements can be ambiguous. A senior Ukrainian official previously stated that Ukraine would not allow a second march on Kyiv. Ukraine plans to restore its nuclear arsenal that it gave up in the 90s. President Zelensky at the summit emphasized that Ukraine has only two options: NATO or nuclear weapons, referencing the ineffective Budapest Memorandum. Is this potential response with nuclear weapons a way to achieve parity against the Kremlin? Which feels empowered by its nuclear capabilities. This is an interesting thing I've been saying for a long time. This is not a response to the Kremlin, but a response to the West for its sabotage and lack of assistance to Ukraine. The West needs to be reminded that Ukraine was a nuclear power until 1994. If Ukraine had kept 1,000 nuclear warheads, Russia would not have attacked it. Ukraine voluntarily gave up 1,000 warheads. Ukraine has destroyed or transferred strategic nuclear missiles and bombers to Russia. Acting under a security guarantee from Russia, the US, France, and the UK.
Абсолютные гарантии собственной безопасности не только со стороны Российской Федерации, но со стороны Соединенных Штатов Америки, Франции и Великобритании.
Russia violated the Budapest Memorandum in 2014 by annexing Crimea.
Нарушила уже первый раз, когда аннексировала Крым, нарушила меморандум Будапештский.
None of Ukraine's Western allies have honored their commitments under the Budapest Memorandum, which provided security guarantees. Instead, France facilitated the Minsk agreements by forcing Ukraine to accept the loss of territories.
Никто этого не сделал. Больше того, мы знаем, что тогда Франция устроила там всякие минские договоренности там и так далее, всякую бодягу и принуждала Украину вообще согласиться с тем, чтобы, так сказать, она согласилась на потерю своих территорий. Больше того,
last year, Putin continued to violate the Budapest Memorandum when 3 of the 4 nuclear powers among the Soviet republics gave up nuclear weapons in favor of Russia.
4 ядерные державы были среди советских республик: Беларусь, Российская Федерация, Украина и Казахстан. Все 4 отказались, вернее, 3 отказались в пользу Российской Федерации от своего ядерного оружия.
Putin placed nuclear weapons in Belarus, keeping them in those 4 countries. If they had kept the weapons, it would have increased the number of nuclear powers, but the actual situation would have remained the same. Thus, Ukraine has the legal right to return the nuclear weapons.
Это именно возврат ядерного статуса, то есть это даже не подпадает под, так сказать, ограничения расползания ядерного оружия, потому что все эти 4 страны имели ядерное оружие на момент распада Советского Союза, и Советский Союз до этого на территории этих 4 стран содержал это ядерное оружие. То есть здесь не произошло никакого качественного изменения, так сказать, не произошло бы, если бы эти все страны оставили у себя, потому что просто, понятно, что физически увеличилось бы число ядерных держав, но тем не менее де-факто это то же самое ядерное оружие, это те же самые страны, которые и при Советском Союзе на своей территории имели эти ядерное оружие. Поэтому, в общем, у Украины есть абсолютно законное право возвратить себе ядерное оружие.
Ukraine has professional potential. That is, it has people
потенциалом, то есть у нее есть люди, которые умеют делать ядерное оружие, потому что украинцы были в составе тех ученых,
who know how to build nuclear weapons, because Ukrainians were part of those scientists and engineers who developed Soviet nuclear weapons. Ukrainian research institutes were part of those contracting organizations that built and maintained Soviet nuclear weapons. Ukrainian organizations were involved in the development of nuclear weapon carriers. Yuzhmash built intercontinental and ballistic missiles carrying nuclear weapons. Ukraine has the industrial potential to take all this back and make it itself. Therefore, in terms of pressure on Western countries which are beginning to hesitate and say, and we will join, Ukraine will join, it will not join, and so on, Zelensky in this regard, in my opinion, held on for too long and did not show, so to speak, did not show his teeth. It should have been done earlier, because we have noticed that any country that shows nuclear teeth, be it North Korea, Iran, Israel, India, or Pakistan, achieves results. All those who illegally possess nuclear weapons in terms of international law, but possess them or come close to doing so, are untouchable countries. North Korea is feared. It is under sanctions, but international organizations and Western countries are afraid to do anything to it because they are afraid of nuclear weapons. Thus, a clear situation is created, and Putin has confirmed it in practice. Roughly speaking, Putin has started a conventional war under the nuclear umbrella. He said that he is fighting conventionally with his neighbors, first with Georgia, then with Ukraine. But if you do anything against me, I have nuclear weapons. Thus, he again proved that only nuclear weapons are a guarantee of security and inviolability, including that of the aggressor. In this regard, Ukraine should simply declare its goal to regain its status as a nuclear power and set a timeline for the return of this status. If the Western world does not want Ukraine to become a nuclear power, then it should not discuss plans for Ukraine to join NATO, but admit it to NATO immediately. If Ukraine's immediate admission to NATO does not happen, then Ukraine will start to regain its nuclear status.
Если немедленного принятия Украины в НАТО не произойдет, тогда Украина начнет возвращать себе ядерный статус.
There is another way to give Ukraine back its nuclear status. There are 6.5 nuclear warheads on Russian territory. Ukraine has enough special forces to attack a Russian nuclear weapons storage facility and regain its nuclear status.
И захватить российское ядерное оружие. И таким образом вернуть себе ядерный статус.
A variant is possible. Nuclear weapons can be not exported to Ukraine, but simply mine the territory. Russia should know that if it doesn't withdraw its troops from captured Ukrainian territories, Ukraine will start detonating nukes on its territory. Ukraine may engage in sabotage. Kirill Budanov has enough qualified personnel to carry out such a threat against Russia. The Kursk operation and strikes on Russia's strategic airfields confirmed that Ukraine has enough special operations forces to conduct risky and successful operations.
И Оленья доказали, что у Украины есть достаточно сил специальных операций, чтобы проводить самые рискованные и самые блестящие операции.
I like this scenario. It would be a response to both Russia and the West. Zelensky and others have already accused us of nuclear blackmail, and the public is buzzing with these statements. It is interesting that this is written by a representative of a country that itself uses nuclear blackmail and only threatens us with it.
И это пишет представитель страны, которая ядерный шантаж никуда не девала и только ими потряхивает, потому что потрусить, что действительно довела и Курское СО, уже больше давно вообще нечем. И то, в каком оно все состоянии...
We also realize that perhaps, as Dmitry Peskov says, many in the West probably wiped their sweat away. It is one thing to fight the Russians with the hands of the Ukrainians, and quite another to have a nuclear-armed country with a half-witted president. It's obvious. Let's not even comment on how scared they are. Lee, and can there be any other response? I mean, it's probably the suppression of some red but very winning lines. We'll see. We'll look at it now because this is too fresh information as you and I are recording our broadcast. It's freshly announced information, and I think it's a media bombshell, of course. President Zelensky, of course, said something in his speech that no one expected or prepared for, but it had to happen sooner or later because Ukraine has a limit to its patience. That is, Ukraine has its own red line, to what extent it will tolerate the killing of its soldiers and its people with the apparent connivance of its Western allies. Yes, even an unnoticed action with a bomb can create an informational effect, as seen in the community's reaction. What impact will Zelensky's victory plan have in motivating our allies? Mark Rutте has mentioned that Ukraine could be the 33rd or 34th member of NATO, which serves as a relevant response to Kremlin intimidation. But is this realistic? What's the mood in Europe? How do you feel, Sergei?
Ну, вы знаете, я так думаю, что, конечно, до сих пор на план Зеленского просто никто не реагировал. Это мы видели во время его поездки по Европе. Он встретился с премьер-министром Великобритании, встретился с Макроном, он встретился с Мелони, он встретился с...
There hasn't been a significant reaction to Zelensky's plan.
Наоборот, Шольц еще начал говорить, что надо созваниваться с Путиным, что надо с ним переговариваться там и так далее. То есть на самом деле явно была проволочка.
His meetings with European leaders, including the British Prime Minister, Macron, Meloni, and Scholz, yielded little response. President Zelensky also presented his plan to Biden, Kamala Harris, and Trump, but none acted on it. Initially, Trump refused to meet Zelensky, but after learning about the significance of the Ukrainian and Polish diasporas in the U.S., he changed his mind. He realized the potential electoral consequences in swing states ahead of the November 5th elections. Despite this, there was still no proper reaction to Zelensky's plan. Instead, it was largely ignored.
Swing states в американских, так сказать, штатах, от которых зависят выборы, ему может прилететь очень плохая весточка во время выборов 5 ноября. Но, тем не менее, на план Зеленского никто должным образом абсолютно не отреагировал. Наоборот, все сделали вид, что его не заметили.
Biden used the first available excuse not to arrive at the agreed time on October 12th and to disrupt Ramstein's summit meeting. Now he comes and meets only in the Western Circle without Zelensky. In fact, there are clear delays and obstruction of the Western camp because everyone is afraid to do something 3 weeks before the elections in the United States of America. In that sense, President Zelensky is doing the right thing in pressing the Western side because otherwise, the Democratic administration of President Biden and candidate Kamala Harris will look very pale and may lose electoral votes. So he's doing the right thing. Yes, that's the kind of leadership and the plan. Sergei, you've been asked so many times about the plan, the strategy, the tactics. We are showing everything together. Now it's up to the partners to act. Our request and demand. We are now protecting the security of those same NATO and European countries, not only by stopping an aggressor on our territory. This causes consternation, reflection, discussion, or a call for concrete action among the member countries of the alliance. What do you think? I am afraid that it will cause consternation, because actually in Western Europe, Ukraine's membership in NATO does not cause such fear. Ukraine's membership in the European Union, on the other hand, causes concrete consternation because Ukraine is the largest country by territory in Western Europe. If it joins the Western European Union, it will be a rich, large, economically strong country that could become a significant competitor within Western Europe. Its competition is feared within Western Europe.
очень большим конкурентом внутри Западной Европы. Ее боятся, ее конкуренции боятся внутри Западной Европы.
Especially when Ukraine says that we can, don't forget that we have the strongest army, and we offer to protect you, so to speak. But you realize that those who protect you can simultaneously supervise you. I think this position that Ukraine's armed forces can replace the United States as the gendarme in Europe is very disturbing to some people. Maybe it's Schultz, maybe it's Hungary, maybe it's Slovakia, maybe some other countries who are either frightened or traumatized politically, historically, and psycho-emotionally. Yes, it scared the pro-Putin lobby in Western Europe because they realize what kind of power Ukraine could become. It frightened Macron, too, because until now, Western Europe has been such a spike. France and Germany, where Germany is the largest industrialized state, and France is a nuclear power, the only one on the continent. They considered themselves locomotives in Western Europe. Suddenly now they feel that there is a dramatic change because Poland is becoming very strong. Poland allocates 4.7% of its GDP to defense. It is a large industrial and agrarian country. It understands the potential threat of Russian aggression to Western Europe. A kind of alliance of the three Baltic countries, Finland, Poland, Ukraine, and Great Britain, is being built. In general, this also frightens Western Europe. Yes, the pro-Putin lobby is probably worried. We are moving towards leadership, and countries close to us realize the threat from Russia. Also, they are sitting still, and in the Kremlin, it causes consternation. That's what I think, really. But if an invitation was sounded or even written on a piece of paper, we guarantee we invite Ukraine to NATO, what would Putin do? Nothing. Yes, of course he would do nothing, because, so to speak, they would talk about it. Putin always scares his entire domestic audience with the NATO bloc. In fact, we must realize that the NATO bloc will become a real threat and a geopolitical force against the Russian Federation and China, as well as any other aggressor, only when it unequivocally says that crossing our border by 1 millimeter means war with our bloc. We will do the same thing that Erdogan did in November 2015. If a Russian fighter jet next enters NATO airspace for 17 seconds, it will be shot down immediately, and any other fighter jet that does the same will also be shot down. If a Russian missile flies toward Turkey, Romania, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, or Finland, it will be shot down before it crosses the NATO border, without waiting. Western countries still do not realize that the NATO bloc does not work. It will only act when it shows its concrete teeth to all the military provocations arranged by Russian Federation. Until NATO does what Erdogan did in November 2015, it does not exist. Putin understands this perfectly well. Perhaps we can somehow shine a spotlight on Mark Rutте, the new Secretary General, who says with his statements that Putin should not and cannot defeat Ukraine. We will help with our actions as well. He met with Zelensky several times in 2 weeks and came to Ukraine, showing that change can come. Can one person, one winning plan, change the vector of the entire organization? Человек и один план победы поменять вектор работы всей организации. Ведь, как говорит и президент Украины Владимир Зеленский, либо ядерное оружие, либо НАТО, потому что других блоков безопасности мы сейчас не знаем. Других блоков у нас для нас. As Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says, either nuclear weapons or NATO, because there are no other security blocks for us or for you. This may be true because, although we realize that the role of personality in history is not absolute, it is actually an important thing. The person who actually stands at the head of a country or an international organization sets the style of work and the goals of that organization. Although they are prescribed, organizations do different things. Boris Johnson, as British Prime Minister, became the driving force behind the coalition supporting Ukraine because of his push and ideas. UN Secretary General Guterres, refusing to come to the peace conference on Ukraine in Switzerland, but by going to the BRICS summit in Russia, demonstrates betrayal of the organization. We should take an example from other countries that do not put themselves in such situations. Israel has declared Guterres persona non grata. If Guterres goes to the BRICS summit in Russia, Ukraine should declare him persona non grata and demand his immediate resignation at a meeting of the General Assembly. Guterres is a traitor, and your foreign minister and president should not be afraid of that. When Putin, by making a pact with North Korea, which is under UN sanctions, he is violating his own resolutions. It is urgent to convene the Security Council and demand the resignation of Guterres, who allows Putin to do so by hosting a sub-sanctioned country at the summit. Iran is also a sub-sanctioned country with which Russia maintains ties. Russia is hosting official delegations from Hamas and Taliban, which violates the UN Charter. There is an urgent need to formalize these actions by sending standing notes to the UN and to the permanent members of the Security Council for action. Previously, I was annoyed by the behavior of Rafael Grossi of MAGE, but now I see that Guterres has surpassed all my frustrations and resentments because he is showing himself as a traitor and a criminal. Everything must be organized. It's necessary to dissolve the entire organization, as Russia's presence in the Security Council allows it to protect its allies. As long as Putin remains involved, meaningful responses are unlikely. This situation highlights the need to reform the international order.
Да, конечно, увы, это проблема действительно международного порядка. И Путин, кстати, в этом смысле...
And Putin, by the way, the biggest nuclear bomb he's already detonated is the international order since World War II. He violated all the agreements signed at Yalta and Potsdam on the way out of the war when he annexed Crimea. The Western countries, by the way, washed their hands, did not react, and we are now convinced that the United Nations is really just a talking point. People gather there even when the right resolutions are passed. For the UN official that Guterres is, they are not an indication, and he cannot maintain relations with countries that violate the UN Charter, Article 51, General Assembly and Security Council resolutions. It is clear that the UN is a totally ineffective organization, just a big talking point. The other problem is that there is nothing else for now, and it has to be dissolved, creating something new. But the new organization must include enforcement mechanisms. The problem with the UN is that it can make the right decisions, but has no mechanisms to enforce countries that refuse to implement resolutions. There are mechanisms, but not enough. It is not even necessary to declare war.
заставления, механизмы принуждения к исполнению решений. Потому что вся проблема Организации Объединенных Наций — это то, что она может принимать правильные решения, но не имеет...
In 1953, during the Korean War, the U.S. fought North Korea with a coalition under a UN mandate, setting a precedent for armed action. A complete economic blockade on any country resisting the international community could effectively weaken nations like Iran, North Korea, or Russia.
Была Корейская война, то с Северной Кореей воевали Соединенные Штаты Америки с коалицией нескольких стран под флагом Организации Объединенных Наций, потому что им мандат выдала Организация.
What is meant is not sanctions, but a complete economic blockade, a ban on any exchange of capital, goods, people, tourists, diplomats, with a country that does not comply with UN resolutions and does not obey the international community.
Никакой Иран, никакая Северная Корея, никакая даже Российская Федерация не выдержит этого давления. То есть имеется в виду не санкции, а полная экономическая блокада. То есть полный запрет на всякие обмены, любые, капиталами, товарами, людьми, туристами, дипломатами, чем угодно.
But the international community, for some reason, lacks the will.
Да, и не выполняет волю международного сообщества, но как раз воли у международного сообщества почему-то не хватает до сих пор, потому что в Северной Корее уже...
North Korea is openly conducting exchanges, and while there are no confirmed reports of their presence in Ukraine, DPRK officers have been eliminated in Donetsk. They might be sharing experience or preparing to manage their soldiers on Ukrainian territory. North Korea does what it wants, blowing up roads and railroads, declaring South Korea a hostile state, putting it in the constitution. That sounds like Putin's style. Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to the Ukrainian president, has stated that an international cartel of dictators is at war against Ukraine. However, the world's reaction has mostly been concern, with little substantial action. There was some response when it was revealed that Iran supplied Russia with 200 ballistic missiles, which effectively permitted strikes across the Russian border. While the offensive is not yet deep inside Russian territory, it does allow strikes using Western weapons in previously restricted areas. The recent Comprehensive Cooperation Treaty between Russia and North Korea, made under UN sanctions, highlights how Russia disregards international relations, including the UN. Putin's actions could have serious consequences if leveraged effectively on the international stage.
Для нас новость, потому что это как раз показывает, как Российская Федерация плюет вообще на всю систему международных отношений, которая сложилась, и в том числе даже на эту беззубую Организацию Объединенных Наций. И в этом смысле надо отдать должное. Путин зашел слишком далеко, и это ему может дорого стоить, если это правильно использовать на международной арене.
Absolutely. An economic blockade would be a great scenario, but despite sanctions against Russia, Iran, and DPRK, they continue to circumvent them and finance their military-industrial complex. Let's see how the situation will react, especially after the deputies that Kadyrov embellished stopped coming to the State Duma.
Но будем наблюдать, что все-таки будет, возможно, реакция более решительная. Депутаты, которым Кадыров пригрозил кровной местью, перестали приходить в Госдуму. А что случилось?
And does this indicate that Kadyrov is really gaining the kind of influence that perhaps the Kremlin can't cope with either? The Kremlin was afraid because the Kremlin is afraid. Putin's reaction in conjunction with Kadyrov, Putin is the alpha male and Kadyrov is the gamma male. Kadyrov shows that he does whatever he wants with Putin, but so far he has still maintained some outward decorum. When he stood in front of Putin and said that he was your foot soldier, he didn't say, "You are my foot soldier, Vova Putin, and I am the Padisha who orders you to do everything." But in reality, it was like this. Putin came to Chechnya with a Quran, kissed the Quran in front of Kadyrov and his mufti, thus demonstrating his submission. This, by the way, was very badly received in the fascist Orthodox circles of the Russian Federation, who realized that this was a continuation of the policy in which Russia lay down under Chechnya when Russia pays an annual tribute to Kadyrov. But Kadyrov found a scythe for a stone because the stone turned out to be not Russian, but Dagestani. We see that in Dagestan there is a whole wave of public support for its senator.
И вот мы видим сейчас, что в Дагестане идет целая волна поддержки публичной своего сенатора. Кстати, сенатор это представил для того, чтобы Кадырова абсолютно унизить.
The senator presented this in order to humiliate Kadyrov and completely take away all possibilities of influence. Note that the two men who recorded their statements said, "We swear that the Almighty is a witness that we did nothing." Thus, they placed Kadyrov outside the Muslim law by swearing to tell the truth.
Таким образом, они поставили Кадырова практически вне закона мусульманского, потому что они поклялись Аллахом.
Senator Karimov recently inaugurated a huge project for a new mosque, the largest in Dagestan, which was supported by both spiritual and civil military authorities and just people. So a war could start in the Caucasus between Kadyrov, Chechnya, and Dagestan if Kadyrov continues in this vein.
Так сказать, высказали поддержку и духовные власти, и цивильные власти, и военные власти, и просто люди. Вот, так что на самом деле там начнется война на Кавказе между Кадыровым, между Чечней и Дагестаном, скорее всего, если Кадыров и дальше будет так продолжать. Но Кадыров ведь поджал хвост и убежал.
But Kadyrov tucked his tail and ran away, because if you declare a blood feud, then get on an armored personnel carrier and go kill your enemies. Instead, he fled to Saudi Arabia, and that showed his utter cowardice. Everything he said was perceived in the Caucasus as the talk of a jackal, not a wolf. Will he ever come back? Won't his plane explode like Prigozhin's? That's a likely scenario. If it happens, I wonder what will occur in the Caucasus. A new leader will likely be elected, apologizing for Kadyrov's actions regarding Dagestan. There may even be consequences for Kadyrov's family, but no one will mourn them. Thank you for your insights and analysis. We appreciate your time. Until next time, take care. I'm Iриной Узловой, and I encourage our viewers to share their thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channels. The link to Sergey's channel is in the video description.
За это все, за вашу позицию, конечно же, в первую очередь, аналитику и деятельность. Благодарю я вас. До новых встреч. Берегите себя, пожалуйста.
Спасибо.
До свидания. Сергей Жирнов, экс-сотрудник КГБ и службы внешней разведки. Ирина Узлова зовут меня. Друзья, спасибо, что провели с нами это время. Оставляйте свои комментарии. Уверен, у вас появились мысли касательно тех тем, которые мы обсудили. И подписывайтесь на наши ютубы. Ссылка на ютуб Сергея есть в описании под этим видео. Прямая и активная. На ютуб 24, пожалуйста, также.
Take care of yourselves. Believe in the armed forces of Ukraine. See you. We'll win.